My name is Marceline Kyra. I am 36 years old. That Saturday was supposed to be my dad's 70th birthday picnic by the lake. I was supposed to be happy. The tables were big and full of food. There were plates stacked high with sandwiches, bowls of fruit, piles of chips, and drinks in every color you could imagine. Music was playing so loudly that it bounced off the trees, and everyone was trying to look like the perfect family. Everyone smiled and laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that sometimes hides anger or jealousy. My 11-year-old son, Thayer, was reaching for another burger when my younger brother Magnus looked at him. He didn't just glance at him. He stared straight into Thayer's eyes. Then, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, Magnus said, "Kids who mooch like you should wait for leftovers." The table erupted. People laughed. Some laughed louder than others. Vivienne was the first to giggle, then Vespera shook her head with that smug little smile that always made me feel small. A few cousins actually clapped. Mom tried to hide her grin behind her hand, like she didn't want anyone to see her enjoying Magnus' joke. Dad just kept staring at his beer. He didn't say anything. Thayer froze. His hand hung in the air. His cheeks turned bright red. He looked so small and my heart broke. I felt the same burn I had swallowed for 9 years since my husband died in that terrible accident. I had spent almost a decade keeping my feelings hidden, pretending everything was okay, but that moment, the way Magnus humiliated my son, something inside me snapped completely. I stood up. I took Thayer's hand. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just walked away from the table. I could still hear their laughter chasing us across the grass. The sound of laughter felt sharp, mean, and wrong. By the time we reached the car, Thayer was shaking. I buckled him in, closed the door, and sat behind the wheel for a long minute. That was the last family picnic I ever went to. 12 hours later, everything about that laughter had changed. What had seemed like fun, harmless jokes became something very different. We pulled into our underground garage at 8:09 p.m. Thayer was already asleep in his car seat, his mouth open and one sneaker hanging off his foot. I carried him up 2 flights of stairs, laid him gently on his bed, and pulled the Spider-Man blanket up to his chin. He didn't move. I left his door slightly open and walked back into the living room. The second I set my keys down, my phone started vibrating on the coffee table like it was trying to escape. 8 missed messages from Mom in the last 45 minutes. The first message came in at 7:51 p.m. "Val, you guys left so fast. Is Thayer okay? Call me when you get home." Then another at 8:02. "Your dad and I were just talking. The new depot outside Fort Worth is $2 million short to break ground next month. You still know those silent investors, right? It would be the perfect birthday gift for Dad." 8:11. "Honey." 8:14. "Marceline, answer me." 8:19. "This isn't funny." 8:25. "We really need this." 8:31. "Please." 8:37. "Fine. I'll wait." I flipped my phone face down. I opened my laptop instead. I had a lot to do. 9 years ago, a fully loaded 18-wheeler crossed the median outside Waco and erased my husband's life in less than 3 seconds. The life insurance gave me $7,412,000. Everyone in my family assumed I spent it on our condo, Thayer's therapy, and his private school tuition, the things they always mentioned at Thanksgiving like trophies. They assumed wrong. I had sent every single dollar to Rafferty Locke, my old college friend who now ran a quiet, low-profile investment company. He never asked questions. He never told anyone. Starting the month Thayer turned 3, every time Dad or Magnus needed cash to buy new trailers, add lanes, or stop the bank from calling in a loan, Rafferty stepped in. Quietly. Every purchase went through an LLC in Delaware, one that no one in the family had ever heard of. Year after year, Rafferty quietly bought small pieces of Kyra freight lines. Over almost a decade, Delaware LLC came to own 35% of Kyra freight lines. That was more than my older sister Vespera's 13%. More than Magnus' 10%. Just shy of Dad's 37%. And that Delaware LLC answered only to me. I logged into the encrypted portal Rafferty had built for me in 2017. The dashboard loaded instantly. 35% stared back at me in crisp black and white. I opened a new message and typed, "Rafferty, begin immediate and total divestment of all Kyra Freight Lines positions. Formal 30-day notice of intent to sell to be hand-delivered by courier to Ronald Kyra first thing Monday morning." No extensions, no negotiations, no contact with any other party. Complete and clean separation. I hit send. Rafferty replied in 19 seconds. Confirmed. Courier locked for 8:55 a.m. Monday delivery to company headquarters. All blocks are pre-cleared for rapid execution. I'm here if you need anything else. I closed my laptop, filled a glass with tap water I didn't even taste, and stood by the window watching the headlights crawl along the street 6 floors below. For 9 years I had listened to Dad brag that Kyra Freight Lines was a pure family company. I nodded politely every 4th of July when he toasted, keeping it 100% Kyra. I had seen Vesper become CFO at 34. I had watched Magnus crown CEO before he turned 27. No one ever asked if I wanted a seat on the board. No one ever wondered where the mystery money came from every time they almost missed payroll and suddenly didn't. They just assumed that the widow and her fatherless son were being taken care of. I thought about Mom's favorite line, the one she always said with a soft hand on my arm. "We will always look after you and Thayer, honey. That's what family does." As if looking after meant letting her youngest son publicly humiliate my 11-year-old in front of cousins, aunts, uncles and second cousins twice removed. My phone lit up again. Another text from Mom. "Did you reach out about the $2 million yet? We're really counting on you, sweetheart. It's for Dad." I pressed and held the power button until the screen went black, set it down and walked back to Thayer's room. He had rolled onto his side, one arm dangling off the mattress. I tucked it under the blanket and sat there for a long time. Tomorrow the formal notice would land on Dad's desk. Monday the banks would panic. I leaned down and kissed Thayer's forehead. "No more waiting for scraps, baby," I whispered. This time I wasn't asking. I was telling you. Tuesday, 8:15 a.m. sharp. My phone rang while I poured Thayer's orange juice. Dad's name was on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at exactly 8:15. Same name. I picked up. "Marceline." His voice sounded rough, gravelly. "Headquarters. Now." I dropped Thayer at school and drove home. By the time I walked in I already had 14 missed calls and 9 voicemails. Dad's first one was at 8:17. "Courier just delivered papers. An LLC called MH Capital Holdings owns 35% of the company and filed intent to sell. The bank is blowing up my phone. Get here." Vesper left a message at 8:20. "Marceline, if you've heard even a whisper about who MH Capital is, you need to tell us. This is life or death for the company." Magnus called at 8:23, practically screaming, "Whoever did this waited until Dad's birthday week like a gutless coward. I will find them and bury them." I deleted everything and started the kettle. 23 minutes later, the Kyra Freight Line's main building looked like a war room. Dad sat frozen at the head of the table, the thick courier envelope sliced open in front of him. Mom stood behind him, rubbing slow circles on his back, the same way she did when the company almost went under in 2009. Vesper stalked back and forth, phone on speaker, firing questions at the outside counsel. Magnus slammed a ream of printed stock transfer records onto the table so hard that the coffee cups rattled. 35%, he roared. "That's more than me. More than Vespera. Almost as much as Dad. How does some anonymous Delaware shell end up with that much of our company without a single one of us noticing?" Vespera killed the lawyer and collapsed into a chair. "It wasn't one purchase," she said, her voice tight. "There were dozens. Every single time we took private cash instead of a bank loan over the last 8+ years, the same buyer was on the other side. We were so relieved to dodge interest payments. We never ran full diligence on the purchaser." Dad finally looked up from the letter, bloodshot eyes. "Who?" he asked slowly. No one had an answer. Magnus kicked the leg of the table. "This is a textbook hostile play," he snarled. "Somebody has been squatting on this block for years, waiting for blood in the water. I'm calling every private equity guy I know. Somebody out there has heard rumors." Vespera scrolled through her contacts. "None of the big carriers have this kind of patience. This took almost a decade of disciplined buying." Mom's phone buzzed in her hand. She stared at the screen and went pale. "It's the First National," she whispered. "They want all of us in their boardroom at 11. Dad closed his eyes for a long second. "Tell them we'll be there," he said. Magnus stormed out, shoulder clipping the doorframe on his way. Vespera stayed behind, spreading the transfer records across the table like puzzle pieces. "Every block is the same LC," she muttered. Same registered agent in Wilmington. Same signature on file. Lock. Dad's head snapped up. Lock? He repeated. As in Rafferty Lock? Vespera froze. It could be a coincidence, she said, but her voice shook. Mom shook her head slowly. She would never. Magnus burst back in face red. The bank just emailed. They said they're requiring an emergency board meeting tomorrow and full personal financial statements from every shareholder over 5% by Friday. Dad leaned back in his chair like someone had punched him in the chest. 30-day clock started yesterday, he said quietly. If we can't come up with roughly $24 million in cash, they can sell to anyone they want. He looked around the big table at the 3 people who were supposed to take over when he couldn't run the business anymore. We have a meeting at the bank in 90 minutes, he said. Everyone be ready to put everything you have on the table. Houses, savings, retirement accounts, everything. Vespera nodded once and quickly started typing on her laptop. Magnus punched the wall again. This time it was hard enough to cut his knuckles. Back in my apartment, I stood by the kitchen window drinking tea. But I didn't taste it at all. My mind was somewhere else. My phone kept buzzing on the counter with new calls, new texts, new voicemails. I left every single one unread. I didn't want to hear anything. I knew exactly how that conference room smelled right now. Burnt coffee, fear, and desperation. I could almost feel the tension like a heavy blanket in the air. I also knew that the moment Dad saw the signature M. Halt on those bank transfer papers, the first real crack had appeared in their perfect family story. But they still hadn't said my name out loud. Not yet. The siege began at 9:42 on Tuesday morning, just minutes after they walked out of the bank empty-handed. Mom called first. Her voice was soft and trembling. Honey, please just tell us what you know. I let the phone ring. Vespera tried at 10:03. Marceline, this is bigger than family drama. Dad's shaking. Literally shaking. Pick up. I declined. Magnus called at 10:18. He was already shouting in the voice preview. You can't just vanish while everything collapses. Straight to voicemail. By Wednesday afternoon the texts were non-stop. Dad sent a photo of the computer screen at work. 0 new jobs booked. Mom sent a crying selfie. I can't watch him lose everything. Thursday 11:51 p.m., the doorbell rang for the first time. Mom appeared on the Ring camera, soaked from the rain, clutching a foil-covered casserole dish like it was a peace treaty. She rang 6 times, whispered, "I'm so sorry," into the camera, left the food and walked away crying. Friday at 6:27 p.m., Dad appeared alone. He stood under the porch light for 9 full minutes, hands buried in his coat, staring at my door like he could open it with his mind. He never rang. He just turned and left. Saturday morning, Vespera arrived with 2 to-go cups from my favorite coffee shop. She sat on the hallway carpet with her back against my door for 51 minutes. Occasionally she spoke to the peephole. I brought your usual 2 pumps of vanilla oat milk. Please Val, just open the door. She finally left the cups and walked away. That same night, just after midnight, Magnus began pounding on the door. I watched the black and white feed from the security camera. He hammered the door with the side of his fist hard enough to make the frame shake. Marceline, open this door right now. You think hiding fixes anything? Dad might lose the company he built with his own hands. He kicked the bottom panel of the door once. I saw Thayer's bedroom light on an hour ago. Tell him Uncle Magnus is out here freezing because his mom wants to play martyr. He waited. I stayed silent. He left the longest voicemail yet. It's televisions, Magnus. I don't know what's going on in your head, but this has gone far enough. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. Mom hasn't eaten in 2 days. If you know anything about MH Capital, if you have even one contact that can help, use it. We're begging you. Family doesn't do this to family. Marceline, call me. He hung up, slammed the door with his shoulder one last time and left. Sunday afternoon, Viven showed up with a bright pink gift bag addressed to Thayer. Inside was a new Nintendo Switch game and a card that said, Uncle Magnus was only kidding, buddy. Let's play soon. Love, Aunt C. I dropped the whole thing in the trash, unopened. Monday they doubled down. Dad's truck and Vespera's SUV blocked 2 visitor spots in the veining lot from 7 a.m. They took turns buzzing every apartment on the 6th floor until security threatened to call the police. I watched from my window as they argued in the veining lot for 27 minutes before driving off. Tuesday, Mom slid a 3-page handwritten letter under the door. I read the first line, "We never meant to make you feel like an outsider." I carried it straight to the shredder. Wednesday, 2:37 a.m., Magnus returned clearly drunk. He slumped against my door and spoke in a low, broken voice. "I'm sorry. Yeah, I was a complete jerk. I'll apologize to Thayer myself. Just tell me what MH Capital wants. Money? A seat on the board? We'll give them anything. Just stop this." He stayed 41 minutes. I didn't move. Thursday, Vesper left a voicemail that actually stopped my breath for a second. "Dad's in the ER. Chest pains. They're keeping him overnight for tests." I didn't call. Friday they went nuclear. All 5 of them, Mom, Dad, Vesper, Magnus, even Viven, camped in the lobby at 6 p.m. They rotated calling, texting, buzzing. Security called me 3 times. I told them I was out of town. By the end of week 2, my phone registered 389 missed calls, 247 unread texts and 34 voicemails. My Ring camera history was nothing but their faces at every hour in every kind of weather, wearing every stage of desperation. Thayer asked once very quietly why Grandma kept leaving containers outside. I told him she was just dropping off treats and ruffled his hair. Every night I double-checked the deadbolt, silenced the ringer, poured chamomile I never drank and sat in the dark living room. They were getting closer to the truth. But they still hadn't said my name out loud in connection with MH Capital. Not once. Week 3 started with a certified letter from First National Bank slid under Dad's office door at 5:47 a.m. Dad found it while making coffee. Thick cream envelope. His name is in raised ink. He opened it and read the single page twice before understanding the words. All credit facilities, including the $28 million revolving line, were frozen pending resolution of the announced 35% divestment. No new advances. No exceptions. He walked to the conference room still holding the letter like it was radioactive. Vesper arrived at 7 a.m., read over his shoulder and went completely still. "That's the oxygen," she whispered. "We can't run trucks without fuel cards and payroll loans." At 9:12 a.m. the second hammer fell. An email from Apex Distribution, representing 29% of total revenue, landed in Dad's inbox. Dad opened it on the projector so the whole room could see. Due to material changes in ownership structure disclosed in recent regulatory filings, Apex Distribution is suspending all contracts effective immediately. Service will resume only upon receipt of written confirmation of stable majority ownership and continued financial capacity. Required documentation must be submitted within 10 business days. Magnus read it aloud, voice rising with every sentence until he shouted the last line. Then he spun and drove his fist straight through the drywall. 10 business days, he roared. We don't even have a current valuation. Mom stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like a life vest. Payroll is 8 days away, she said quietly. Vesper was already running calculations on her laptop. Without the revolver and with Apex on ice, we were short $800,000 just for next Friday's driver pay, fuel and insurance. Dad picked up the phone and called the bank president he'd known since 1998. "I'm sorry," the man said before Dad finished his plea. "The credit committee met at 8. Until the ownership cloud lifts, no officer can override. It's out of my hands." The line went dead. Magnus kicked the metal trash can so hard it dented. By noon, 3 smaller shippers sent identical suspension notices, each citing prudent counterparty risk. By 2 p.m. the fuel card provider called. Kyra Freight Line's accounts were moved to prepaid status effective Monday. For drivers posted on private Facebook groups, Kyra's credit is frozen. Start looking. Wednesday, Apex followed up with a 17-page demand packet. 5 years of audited financials. Personal financial statements for every shareholder. Proof of over 5% liquidity. Updated certificates of insurance. Everything. Vesper canceled her kids' soccer practice and stayed at the office until dawn pulling files. Thursday morning, the yard that usually roared with engines sat half empty. Drivers stood in small knots on their phones reading the same rumors. Dad stopped going home. He kept a duffel in his office and showered in the mechanic's bay. Mom brought meatloaf. No one touched it. Magnus hadn't slept in 72 hours. Viven told Mom he paced the house all night on conference calls with every distressed asset fund in Dallas, offering anything for a quick bid on the 35% block. Every call ended the same. Who exactly is MH Capital Holdings and why are they selling now? No one had an answer they were willing to say out loud. By Friday, the company that once bragged about 48 straight years of on-time payroll was staring at the very real possibility of bouncing direct deposits for the first time ever. The dispatch board stayed dark. Phones stayed silent. And in every frantic meeting, every whispered hallway conversation, every prayer muttered in the break room, they still danced around the one name none of them had dared to speak in connection with the 35%. They were running out of days and they were running out of excuses. Day 26, Friday. The phone rang at 7:06 a.m. while I was tying Thayer's shoes. Dad's name on the screen. I answered this time. His voice came through cracked and trembling like an old man I didn't recognize. Marceline, it's finished. We lost everything. We didn't wait for you. At 4 yesterday, Crestview Capital walked in with the only offer on the table. 18% of fair market value for the entire 35% block. They demanded 3 board seats and full veto rights on any contract over $3 million. If we didn't sign by 5 today, they would walk and the bank would start forced liquidation Monday morning. Payroll bounces Tuesday. A long shaky breath. I signed it. I had no choice. I stayed silent. He kept going. Words spill faster. I built this from 2 trucks and a leased trailer. 50 years of my life. And now strangers own more than I do because we couldn't raise $24 million in 26 days. No one else even bid. I just needed you to hear it from me before it hits the news. The line stayed open. I said nothing. At 4:11 in the afternoon, the signing happened in the same room where Dad used to cut his birthday cake every July. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and polished wood. Dad sat at the head of the long table holding the pen with both hands because his hands were shaking so much. Every time he tried to lift it, his fingers trembled. Mom stood behind him, crying quietly, and the tears fell on his shirt. I could see her shoulders shaking. My older sister, Vespra, looked at the papers like they were really bad news. She stared at every line as if she could read the future from them. My younger brother, Magnus, stood against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. He looked angry and scared at the same time. I could remember how tense he looked even though he tried to hide it. The Crestview company sent one man, Eric Svein. He was in his late 30s, wearing a perfect dark suit, shiny shoes, and he didn't show any feelings. His hair was neatly combed and his eyes were cold. He put the final papers in front of Dad without saying a word. Dad looked at our family one last time. I'm sorry, he whispered softly, almost too quiet to hear. Then he signed the first page. His signature, Ronald Kyra, in blue ink, pressed hard enough to make the ink bleed a little. Page after page, 10 pages in total, he signed slowly, each stroke heavier than the last. You could see him struggling to hold the pen steady. When the last page was done, Vane took the papers, put them in a black folder and stood up. Congratulations, he said flatly without a smile. Crestview now controls Kyra Freight Lines. Our directors will be in place Monday. Expect new rules by Wednesday. He didn't shake hands. He just walked out of the room, leaving a heavy silence behind him. Vesper spoke first. 3 seats and veto rights. They can stop anything. They can make us run out of money whenever they want. Magnus laughed, but it was a cruel, ugly laugh. They just bought 35% of the company for almost nothing and now they can tear it apart piece by piece. Mom's crying filled the room like a sad, heavy cloud. Dad stayed in his seat, staring at his own signature as if it belonged to someone else. Vespra pulled up a new chart of company ownership on the screen. Crestview Capital, 35% Dad, 32.1% Vespra, 11.7% Magnus, 9% employees and minor holders, the rest. Dad was no longer the main owner of the company that still had his name on it. Magnus looked at Dad, his face red with anger. You sold our family company for 18 cents on the dollar. Dad whispered almost too softly to hear. Payroll is 6 days away. Fuel cards are frozen. Apex has already taken 60% of our trucks. The bank was going to take them Monday. I had to keep the doors open. No one argued. We all just sat quietly, feeling like our dream was dying. It was like watching a slow, sad movie where nothing you do can change the ending. At 5:49 p.m. my phone buzzed once. It was an unknown number. The message said, "Transaction complete. $240,000 wired to your account. Pleasure doing business, Rafferty. I put the phone down, walked to the balcony and watched the city lights turn on. They twinkled like tiny stars. Across town, the man who used to promise our company would stay in the family forever had just given control to strangers for almost nothing. He didn't even know the money came from me, the daughter he had ignored for years. 2 months later, the boardroom felt like a courtroom. The 3 Crestview people sat on one side. Eric Svane was in the middle, and 2 other silent men in navy suits were on each side. Dad sat at the head of the table out of habit, but everyone knew they were the ones in charge. Mom wasn't invited. Vespera and Magnus sat on the other side, looking like they hadn't slept in weeks. Their eyes were red, their hands were clenched, and they looked tired and worried. The questioning began at 9 a.m. and lasted 6 long, painful hours. Vane opened a thick binder and didn't smile once. His eyes scanned every paper like he was searching for mistakes. Revenue is down 29% since closing. Operating profits went from 11 to -4. Explain, he said in a cold, sharp voice. Vesper tried to explain about the Apex suspension and how it caused problems with other customers. Magnus tried to explain driver bonuses. But Vane just stared at them without saying anything. His stare felt heavy, like he was judging every word they said. At noon, Vane slid 2 spreadsheets across the table. Option 1, he said, we put in $15 million new dollars, but you must do the following in 60 days. Cut 28% of your workers, cut salaries of senior managers by 45%, sell the Kansas City depot and stop extra pension payments. Magnus leaned forward. You want us to fire 1,000 drivers and cut our own pay almost in half? Yes, Vane said calmly. Or option 2. We don't give money and the bank takes the company. Your choice. Vespera's voice shook. Those drivers worked with us for 20-30 years. You can't just. Vane cut her off. We control the board. We control the money. You kept the name on the door. We kept the votes. Dad finally spoke softly. You're asking me to sign termination letters for people who helped me build this company. I said sign or watch it die, Vane said. The room went completely quiet. Magnus' knuckles turned white as he gripped the table. Vespera stared at the numbers like they could magically change. At 3:07 p.m. Vane closed the binder. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to sign these papers. After that, we won't give you the money and the banks will take over. He and the 2 silent partners left without saying another word. The door clicked shut. Dad looked older by 10 years in 10 seconds. Vespera put her head in her hands. Magnus jumped up so fast his chair fell. They just turned us into employees in our own company, he said. His voice was full of anger and pain. Vespera looked up, her eyes red and wet from crying. If we fight them, we lose everything. If we sign, we save the company but ruin the culture Dad built for 50 years. Dad stared at the empty seats. I already gave them control to save the company, he whispered. Now they want me to help destroy it. No one said anything. The silence in the room was heavy and painful, like a thick blanket smothering everyone. That night, the list of people to be fired was made. 142 names, some had worked for 30 years or more. The salary cut memo was written. Dad, Vespera, and Magnus would take home less than half of what they earned 2 months ago. Every name on the list made my heart ache. Every number on the spreadsheet made the room feel colder. By morning, the papers were signed in shaky blue ink. At 4:52 p.m., the documents were sent to Crestview's office downtown. 15 minutes later, $15 million wired into the account, just enough to keep the company alive for another quarter. Across town, I checked the bank and saw the payment arrive. Then I booked 2 one-way tickets to Portland for the next week. The company Dad promised would always stay in the family was now on life support, owned by strangers who paid almost nothing and demanded sacrifices. The family that ignored me for years now felt powerless. 4 months later, I packed the last box. The apartment was empty except for our footsteps. Thayer carried his small backpack and his stuffed shark. I looked at the living room wall where his height marks were and then closed the door without locking it. The landlord already had the keys. Outside, the moving truck waited. In Portland, Oregon, 2,000 miles away and 1 time zone different, I bought a small cedar house on a quiet street 10 minutes from the ocean. It smelled like fresh paint and pine. No one in the family knew the address. Rumors spread anyway. Magnus and his wife lost their house. The bank took it 2 weeks after the second pay cuts. They lived apart now. He took the dogs. He took the smaller car that got repossessed last month. Dad sold the big house with the pool and guest house. He and Mom moved into a small 2-bedroom condo near the hospital so Dad could see his new doctor easily. Vespera still went to the office every day, but the building looked half empty. Drivers left after layoffs. The Kyra Freight Line sign still hung above the gate, but the trucks had a small Crestview logo. I didn't answer a single message from my family, frantic, angry, or broken. I changed all our phone numbers, carriers, everything. Thayer climbed into the car. "Are we really never coming back?" he asked quietly. "Never," I said. He nodded, hugged his shark, and watched Dallas disappear in the mirror. We crossed the Red River before lunch. By night we could smell the ocean. The new house smelled like fresh paint and pine. Thayer picked the bedroom with the slanted ceiling and ocean view. I hung his height chart and marked the first line. Day 1, Oregon. That night I sat on the porch and enjoyed the quiet. No sirens, no phone notifications, no ghosts. Somewhere behind us, strangers in suits were carving up Dad's company. Somewhere behind us, Magnus was sleeping on a friend's couch. Somewhere behind us, Mom and Dad were learning what it felt like to need help. I left them all behind without looking back. Thayer came outside in pajamas, barefoot on the cool wood. "Mom," he whispered. "I can hear the waves." I pulled him onto my lap. "That's our new sound," I said. He fell asleep on my shoulder. I tucked him into bed.